Hello, my name is Patrick Allen, and I am one of the interviewers for the Veterans History Project for the Library of Congress. And that is being conducted here today, which is September the 13th, good old Friday the 13th. We are at the Cincinnati Hamilton County Public Library, and the program is under the auspices of Brian Powers. He's the one that does these interviews here at the library, and Brian is here today, and he will be our cameraman and ask some questions during the interview. So we're privileged today to take the video interview of a Vietnam veteran whose name is James Paul Urmanic. Jim, can I call you Jim?
Yes, you can.
All right. Yeah. Thank you for doing this interview for us. Before we get to your military activities, let's talk about you and your background, your family, and what's going on. When were you born and where?
Well, I was born June the 30th, 1948. I was born in Hamilton, Ohio. My parents were Paul and Mary Urmanic. I was the only child, single child, and spent most of my time in Hamilton. There was a few years that we did move up north. I was up in Elyria, Ohio, for about 4 or 5 years up there in my younger childhood. But most of my time I spent and was schooled in Hamilton, Ohio.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your family. You said your father's name was Paul. What was his full name?
Paul Carl Urmanic.
And when was your dad born, if you remember?
Oh, October the 8th, 1907.
And your mother, what was your mother's name?
My mom's name was Mary Verna. Her maiden name was Hooker, and she was born February the 15th, 1916.
All right. I've got a note down here that Owens is in her name also.
That's correct. Yeah, that was. It was kind of a her father was well, I should say her mother at one time. My grandparents, I'm going to mess this up. My grandparents at that time, he had been married twice, and so she was actually an Owens. His first wife was Owens, and then eventually she passed away, and he married I don't know how to say this. Anyway, it's family, related as Owens, but basically it's Hooker.
Okay. And what kind of work did your dad do?
My dad was a blue collar worker.
Where did he work?
Oh gosh, he worked for various companies in Hamilton, Baldwin, Lima, Hamilton. He worked for Bendix Aviation Corporation.
What did he do at Baldwin, Lima?
I am not sure exactly. I think he was, basically like a millwright. He did, so far as production, work there, and I believe the same thing at Bendix Aviation.
I think Baldwin, Lima, Hamilton had a facility up in Lima, Ohio, and they used to make steam engines.
Right. Right.
Were they making steam engines?
I am not sure about that. My dad wasn't an over talkative person and that about what he did or anything like that. I know, from his time from Baldwin, and then when he went to Bendix, and then when Bendix Aviation finally moved out of Hamilton, there was a time period there where he worked a lot of different odd jobs. Matter of fact, prior to his death, he worked for a Tompkins Oldsmobile Cadillac dealership and that, and he was basically I guess like a cleanup man or a partial body man, cleanup man, and that's what he did prior to his death.
And when did he pass away?
He passed away in November of 1962.
So he was a fairly young man then.
Yeah, he was approximately about 55 years old.
What happened?
Dad was always, he was always a stout, stocky, young, kind of a muscular guy, but he was short. My father was only approximately about 5'7", and all of his life he always did a lot of manual labor and everything else like that. And we used to, he had, my mom, one of her half brothers, had a farm out in Millville, and he grew various crops out there. It wasn't a livelihood, but they did grow crops out there, and Dad would and I would go out, and when they were harvesting corn or whatever task out there had to be done. And there was some acres of hay out there, and we would go out there and work out there for my uncle. And Dad was always he was always a big eater, and he never gained a lot of weight or anything like that, but he was just a husky person. And we happened to be out there one summer, and Dad had been experiencing stomach problems. He had lost a lot of his appetite. He wasn't eating meals like he used to, large meals and stuff like that. And he just, he just felt bad all the time. So we discovered that, he went to, our family doctor at that time, and the doctor, requested that he go see a surgeon. And so we went, he went to see this surgeon, and he had found out that he had 3 tumors in his stomach. So at that time, the surgeon had decided to take a portion of his stomach out where the tumors were located, and they found out that 2 of the tumors were benign, but the 3rd tumor was malignant. And unfortunately, the cancer had started spreading. The doctor then had told us after the surgery, and this was back in 1962, he said that I wouldn't give him much more than about 6 months. And my father passed away 5 months and 21 days later.
Wow. From
cancer. Which then left me and my mom. My mom and I didn't really have a real good relationship.
Did she work outside the home?
Not really. She did a few menial tasks around. I mean, she would do some extra sewing or something like that for somebody, but not a lot. But unfortunately, during my dad's passing, after my dad passed and that stuff, she developed an alcohol problem, and she basically, I hate to say it, but became a hardcore alcoholic. And there were times that she would disappear. She would be gone 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks.
When did she pass away?
She passed away in 1998, and that she had a massive heart attack. I went over one day after we had I kind of kept my distance from her for a long time, and finally we had a reconciliation, and I started seeing her more, even though she still had an alcohol problem. But she lived in a little duplex at the time, and I went over to, I called her the night before to see about, she needed some groceries or some errands running at, and she said, yeah, and so I went over the next day, to check on her to get this list and that, and consequently, I couldn't get into her house, and that all of her doors were locked. I didn't have any key at that time. I had to call I called the local police department. They came, they called the fire department. The fire department broke in, and unfortunately,
she had passed away.
She had passed away from a massive heart attack.
Well, no, she was what you told me, she's about 7 years younger than your dad.
She was, let's see, her and Dad there was just about 8 years difference in age, and that they had me late in life. My dad was 40 and my mom was 32 at the time.
How did they meet? She was younger than he.
Gosh,
or do you know?
I really don't have any idea exactly how they met. My dad came from a large family. There was approximately 13 kids, in his family. And
where were they from?
Oh, they were spread out from all over the place.
I mean, when your dad was born, where was he born?
Most of them were born up around in the northern part of Michigan and that around Sheboygan, Mackinac Straits up there. I still have some family that's in Wisconsin, upper part of Ohio, and recently, a couple of years ago, I found out that I still have family over in Czechoslovakia too.
Is that where your father?
Basically, yeah, that's where he was. He was born over there, and he came over here with my grandma. My grandfather came over here first, and was over here for approximately about a year, and then he sent for my grandmother and my dad. My dad was the oldest, and then eventually they had 12 children over here after him.
So, what did your grandfather do when he came here?
Basically, I'm not really sure, but it was probably a lot of blue collar work then at that time.
Do you know why he came to the U.S.?
It was the golden dream, and at that, so far as we weren't, I guess at that time, my family over there was just barely surviving, and there was America was kind of the promised land, to show up and come over.
Okay, so we've got through that part, and where did you go to school when you were a young man?
Most of my schooling was in Hamilton,
What
Ohio.
school?
Oh gosh. When Dad was working good, I went to Catholic schools. When Dad wasn't working good, I went to public schools. I started out at Jefferson Elementary, and I stayed there for about a year, about 2 years, and then when my father was working well, then I went to St. Veronica's Catholic school. And then consequently, if things were doing good, and then I reverted back to, I'll say I went to Grant Elementary, I went to Buchanan Elementary. We were one of the first groups. I actually, in my junior high, we were one of the first 6th grade classes to be at a junior high, because at that time there was not enough students in the district where I was going to school at, and so they combined us from students from different parts of the city, and I actually went to Harding Junior High in my 6th grade year.
Okay.
And then, so far as high school, I went to Hamilton Garfield High School.
Hamilton Garfield, okay, but where were you going to school when you got out of the 8th grade?
Well, Harding Junior High was actually 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th. Yeah, 9th grade.
Okay.
And that. You didn't start senior high school until you were in 10th grade.
10th grade?
Right.
All right. So when did you graduate from Garfield?
Actually, about 1966. I didn't really graduate per se from Garfield. There was a situation that happened at this time. There was a friend of mine, a so-called friend of mine. One night, like I said, I worked various part-time jobs when I was in high school.
When you were in school? Well, you didn't tell us that, okay.
Yeah, I apologize for that, but since there was no, since the I went ahead and I lived with my grandmother at that time, and my dad's mom, and so to help her with things, because she was on a fixed income, I worked various part-time jobs.
What kind of work did you do during school?
Oh gosh, well, I worked at a lot of mom and pop's grocery stores, cleanup. I had 2 paper routes. I sold shoes for Tom McCann's. I worked for as a stocker for Albers.
What was Albers?
Albers was a grocery store.
Oh, Albers, A-L-B-E-R-S.
A-L-B-E-R-S.
That's an old time.
Old time, yeah. But one evening after I'd got off of work, I stopped to put gas in my car, to go home. And there was, like I said, I'm going to call him a so-called friend. He worked at this gas station. I stopped there to get gas, and at that time, his vehicle wasn't operational. He'd come out and asked me, if I would, give him a lift home, a ride home, and I said, yeah. And I said, no problem, and he lived over on the other side of town, on the west side of Hamilton. So he closed it. Back then, in the 60s, it wasn't like it is now. Everything kind of shut down at 9 o'clock, 9:30 at night. I mean, there was not much open after that. So he closed the station down. I took him home, and while we were there and that, he asked me if I'd do him another favor, and there was a laundromat / dry cleaning place about 2 blocks away from his apartment, and he'd asked me if I'd take him down there, with his laundry, and then he would turn around and walk, and once he got his laundry done, would walk it back. And I said, sure, no problem. So I took him down there. Once we got down there, I was getting ready to leave. He told me that he only had enough money at that time, to do the laundry and his drying. He'd left his detergent back up in his apartment and asked me if I'd go back up and get it. And I said, yeah. And so I went back up. He gave me the keys to his apartment. I went back up. I picked the detergent up. When I came back down, to my surprise, I found out that he had broken into this dry cleaning place. Well, I wanted no part of it. I walked in, I seen where the store had been, jimmied open, and I dropped the detergent, and I turned around and I walked out. But unfortunately, this facility, this laundromat, had been broken into before, and there was a lady that lived catty corner to the facility, and apparently she was friends with the owner, and so she kind of kept an eye on it. Well, next day I was in school, 2 Hamilton police cars pulled up, and I was, my classroom at that time was at the front of the building, and I seen the 2 police cars pull up, and I just had this eerie feeling that something was going to happen. And within 10 minutes, got a message from the office for me to report down there, and I reported down to the office, and unfortunately I was placed under arrest, for breaking into this facility, supposedly. What apparently had happened, the woman had...
She'd been watching?
She took my license number and that. Of course, at that time, I denied any wrongdoing. I denied that I had any access to it. I didn't want to implicate my friend at the time, but, I was being pressured, and they eventually, found out, who he was. They brought him in. He turned around and he implicated me also as being part of the burglary. And
trying to save his buns.
He's trying to save his rear end, basically, in that. And so at that time, I felt no loyalty, towards him or anything like that. So basically, at that time, not having any type of family representation of lawyers or anything like that. When I went to court, basically I was advised to, go ahead. I had two options. I could go ahead and try to fight this, or, basically go into the military. And so it wasn't hard. And then I thought, nah, I'm not going to try. I'm not going to try to fight this. So I went ahead and decided to go in the military. And at that day and time and period, there happened to be a Marine recruiter there at the courtroom, and he turned around and
just a coincidence.
Just a coincidence in that, But
so what did the judge tell you? Did the judge tell you that that he would, if you made the choice of going into the military, you had a particular service you had to go into?
Yeah, well, he didn't really state that, but it just happened to be the fact that he was there, the Marine recruiter was there, and that. But he did tell me that if I decided to go into the military and that my record would be expunged, and there would be nothing, nothing on it or anything like that. So, basically I agreed, and I went back to the Marine recruiter's office, and we started the paperwork in effect, and I was given just approximately about 2 weeks, but he said, what we're going to do, he says, since you were in high school, he said, I'm going to take you down to Villa Madonna College, which is now Thomas More College, and he said, we'll get your GED. So
now, where is Villa Madonna?
Down in, it's Thomas More College now, so it's right down in Kentucky, Erlanger, I guess.
In northern Kentucky?
Northern Kentucky, yeah. And so I went down there, I took all my tests, I went ahead and acquired my GED, my equivalent of a high school diploma.
Uh-huh.
And so within that time period there, that was done, and shortly, a day before I was supposed to leave for boot camp for the Marines, I got a call to come up and see the recruiter, and so I went up there to see him, and
this is the Marine recruiter?
Marine recruiter, right. And he had told me at that time that he received a message that morning that his quota was frozen, that they could not take anybody in. And, I was in a dilemma because according to the court, judicial system, I was supposed to leave on a certain day, which was the next day. And, so he told me, he said, well, no problem. He says, we'll get you into the service now. So he actually took me down to the Army recruiter, and I signed up with the Army that day. So
so you satisfied the judge's ruling?
I satisfied the judge's ruling where I didn't have any, I wasn't going to be there past the date that I was, wasn't supposed to be. And so I ended up, I took a 3-year enlistment, with the United States Army in November of 1966. I was sworn in down here in Cincinnati, and shortly after that, I went ahead and caught a bus, and we were on our way to Fort Knox, Kentucky. That's where my basic training was.
At that time, did you have any idea that you might be ending up in Vietnam?
I didn't really think at that time. I didn't know exactly where I was going to go. I was kind of, at that time, a period of time, I was kind of hoping for stateside duty, where I'd be stationed in the States. But, there was, from talking to, previous people, there was a chance of going to Germany or a chance of going to Vietnam. Once I got in, once I got finished with my basic training, then I was transferred to Fort Gordon, Georgia.
How long was your basic there at Fort Knox?
Fort Knox was 8 weeks. I spent 8 weeks there. Qualified with weapons, various weapons, .45 caliber pistol. At that time, an M14, and like I said, then I drew orders for Fort Gordon, Georgia, for communications.
Right now, where was Fort Gordon located?
Fort Gordon's right, basically, well, in Georgia, but it's right close to Athens, South Carolina. So it's almost on the borderline of South Carolina and Georgia. And so I went down there for communications training, also for crypto, which is coding and decoding of messages. And
now, is that something you chose to get into, or they
yeah,
just assigned
well,
that?
I chose the communication part, but then due to my courses down there at Fort Gordon, they went ahead and I had the aptitude for for the crypto, for the coding and decoding messages. So they went ahead and actually offered that also into the communications part too.
How big was the camp there at Fort Gordon compared to Fort Knox?
I would
Larger,
say
smaller, about the same?
I'd say they're about similar. Yeah, they so far as there was various different schools down there at Fort Gordon. There was lineman schools down there. People so far as doing stringing telephone wire. It was basically a communication center kind of thing down there, and it was most of Fort Gordon had to do with some type of signal communication.
All right. So how long were you at Fort Gordon in this crypto school?
I was there for about 7 weeks, and after graduation from there, we received orders. It was kind of a funny situation. All the draftees, anybody that had been drafted for a 2-year stint, when the orders come down, they sent them to Germany. All the RA, they were what they classified as U.S. All the RA, which was regular Army, we all drew orders for Vietnam. But with a little stint that I had to do down in Fort Polk, Louisiana, which was jungle training. And I spent 4 weeks down there.
Where was that located?
Louisiana. And
where in Louisiana? The bayous, or?
Yeah, the swamps. And basically, it gave you a preempt to what Vietnam was going to be like. We went down there. It was pretty hot and muggy, and like I said, it was basically a class in survival. So far as jungle training. They also had there was a camp down there that they called Tigerland, and this little section down there was basically sort of a capture and an escape thing. They gave you a scenario. They gave you an area from, you were at point A and you were supposed to go to point B. But in that period, from point A to point B, and that most of the guys got captured. And they actually had a facility down there that actually some of the, in case you were captured over in Vietnam, it was set up like a prison, like a POW camp. And there was certain areas down there, like I said, they would put you what we called the bamboo bird cage, which was a cage that hung from a tree, and and they actually put you in this cage and kept you in there.
How long would they keep you in there?
They would keep it. They would question you. They had Asian people at that time there as dressed up as supposedly Viet Cong or NVA, North Vietnamese regulars, and they would interrogate you. And if they didn't get the information, if you stayed true to name, rank, and serial number, and that, and then basically if they couldn't get any information out of you, and then they would put you in the bird cage. They also had the pit, which again was a sort of a rectangular hole into the ground, and with a bamboo open trap door on top of it, and that a lot of times there would there's bugs, there's all kinds of little critters in there and stuff like that, trying to force information out of you.
Trying to break you down.
Try to break you down, to see what, so far as physical, abuse, you got slapped around. You would maybe get punched in the stomach. You'd get, they did have some physical contact, but it wasn't to the point where, they would beat you within an inch of your life, but they more or less gave you a taste of, what could happen if you were captured.
So did you serve any time in a bird cage?
I didn't do the bird cage, but I did the pit and that. And
how long were you in the pit?
I was in the pit for about 14 hours down there, and then after they brought me out of that, and then they also had what they called the cage, which was a stream, and it was like a cage that you would keep a lion or a tiger, a wild animal in, or something like that, and they would set this cage down in the stream and leave it in, and there was probably, I'd say 4 inches of water that would flow through the cage. I never had that. I never got that, but I did get the pit, and but it was basically to see how much stamina you had, how much I hate to use the word punishment, but that's the only word that comes to my mind. But how much you could endure, to basically see, if you would crack, But like I said, I never got that part, but I did get the pit.
So how long were you down in Fort Polk?
I was down there for, I think our training down there was about 4 weeks.
So now, during that 4-week period of time, you were subjected to all this, what you say is punishment. Did any of this have anything to do with your crypto?
No. Basically, I would have to say the first 2 weeks that we were down at Polk, we had various training areas. We had, they showed us various booby traps. They showed us various situations that, stuff could happen to you, if you were out in the field, out in the bush. The torture, so far as the Tigerland, the one area there, that only lasted approximately 3 days.
Okay.
But basically, the 4 weeks I was down there, it was a learning process to, learn various insects, snakes, different, different booby traps, things could happen to you over there.
Well, years down the road when somebody is seeing your video and is totally unfamiliar with the Vietnam War, what kind of booby traps were you exposed to as far as the instructions, and what kind of booby traps you might encounter over in Vietnam?
Well, one of the most popular booby traps over there was punji sticks, which is nothing but bamboo, which is cut down into a sharp point, and then it's usually a lot of times they'll put it into what they call a spider trap, which is a hole dug into the ground. These punji sticks are then inserted into the ground. The NVA and the Viet Cong at that time were infamous about urinating or feces or anything else, dropped onto these punji sticks. So basically, if you walked and you stepped, there would be like a false covering over the top, and if you stepped in there, that stuff, usually that would penetrate. It was more to maim, somebody, to take you out of action. There was
how would the hole be? How deep would the hole be?
Oh gosh, anywhere from 2 to 3 feet, and that, approximately. I've seen shallow holes. They even had there was traps over there called spider holes that actually a Vietnamese soldier, NVA soldier, or Viet Cong would actually be immersed down in that hole, and then would be, it would be covered with grass, thatch, over the top of the hole, and as a group would proceed by, and at once a platoon or squad went by, then this gentleman, this soldier would pop up and could shoot you in the back or whatever the case may be. They had various mines over there. They had what they called a bouncing Betty. This mine, if you triggered it, as soon as you stepped on it, it didn't explode at that time. But as soon as you stepped on it, it was a spring-loaded mine that would pop up approximately 2.5 to 3 feet into the air, and then go ahead and explode at that time. And that was another thing. If you happen to be, if you were the one that happened to trip the mine, usually you were dead. But it threw enough shrapnel outwards and that stuff that it could also damage other soldiers within that area. And it might be minor wounds, but it could be but the person usually tripped that, and that they could kill him, or it could maim him.
Take his legs off.
Yeah, take his legs basically off, and that. There was I can't think the terminology right now in my mind in that, but and again, a lot of these were spring-loaded traps. Some of them were instituted into trees, that there was a trip wire, and you would hit this wire, and it would be a tree that was would have these stakes driven into into this tree, and as soon as you hit that trip wire, the tree had was a springing forward. It would spring forward and that stuff, and could impale you. A lot of different devices, and that those right there are probably what sticks in my mind the most in that.
Now, would they have those just on the paths or the roadways, or would they be
not necessarily
out in the bush?
You could encounter it. A lot of the spring-loaded traps were actually in the jungle, in the bush, and that covered up to a thing, to a certain extent. The paths, that was mostly mines then, and there could be they could have a tripwire stretch across the path with grenades on either side, and as soon as you hit that tripwire, it pulls the pins out, the handles release, and then all of a sudden the explosion off the grenade. So there was like I said, you would tend to see that a little bit more on paths. So far as the spring-loaded punji sticks and everything like that was, that would basically be in the jungle.
So after you finish 4 weeks at Polk, what happens to you?
Well, then I got a whopping 2-week leave, which I came home and spent my time here.
Was that your first leave?
That was actually I got a small Christmas leave in December of '66. I was about 6 weeks through my basic training, and Christmas came up, and anybody that was lived within the northern Kentucky area, southern Ohio, Indiana area, and that they went ahead and gave us a 7-day leave then. But after Polk, that was basically the 2-week leave before I went to Vietnam.
All right. So at that time, were you married?
No.
Right.
No.
So you go to Vietnam. Where did you disembark from for Vietnam?
Well, I left the States out of California.
Where?
And we flew to...
Where in California did you leave from?
I got a mind block right now, Pat. It was close to LA, right outside of LA is where we left.
And did you fly?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
was that commercial or military plane?
At that time, the first flight, or the first section of that stuff, was military flight. We flew from like I said, to California to Hawaii. Then we were supposed to refuel and get back on the military aircraft. I want to jump back just for a second. I had just missed. If I'd have been there a week earlier in California, I would have went by ship. But because they were still sending guys over by ship, which at that time was about a 2.5 week to 3 week journey by ship. So I was kind of glad I missed that, because I'm not crazy about the ocean. Somebody asked me one time, says, how come you went so far as being a ground pounder and that stuff? And I said, well, I could walk a lot farther on dirt than I can swim in the ocean and that. So that's the reason why. But anyway, we caught a military hop from California to Hawaii, and we were supposed to do a refueling at that time. And unfortunately, we were held up. We did find out that there were some problems with the plane, that they were going to transfer us over to a civilian aircraft to fly us on into Vietnam. But we also had 4 guys that decided they didn't want to go to Vietnam, so they jumped the plane and that they took off. And so they held us up partially for that while they were looking, for these 4 individuals. Apparently they had it played out pretty well on that stuff. They had somebody that was lived in Hawaii or something like that, and it afforded them civilian clothes, and they ditched all their military uniforms and took off.
You ever hear anything about them?
Never heard anything else. No, never found out anything about that. What it did, though, when we switched over, when we also found out the military aircraft was not functional, so they put us on a civilian flight, and we left from Hawaii, and we flew to the Philippines. That was our next refueling stop. Once we got to the Philippines, Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines, as we disembarked, because for the refueling and that, we had APs, which were Air Force guards, and same thing as MPs and that. So they weren't going to take on a chance anybody was going to jump the plane again and that. But the guys at the air base and that were pretty good and that. They went ahead and they put us in a hangar, and at that time, and we all were situated in the hangar, and they had these wash tubs iced down with San Miguel beer, and so that was kind of a treat.
How long were you there in the Philippines?
Not long. About 2 hours, about 2.5 hours.
It wasn't days, it was just hours.
No,
okay.
Just the refueling thing and that. And I get a little emotional. And there's going to be certain times that
well, take your time.
This might happen, but anyway, like I said,
anything happened in the Philippines?
No. Like I said, we we had a lot of guys that, surprising enough, you would think, a young 18-year-old, 19-year-old, whatever, and that stuff would want to get plowed under, or want to have a few beers and that stuff. But there was a lot of guys that didn't drink, and now me, I kind of overdrank my share. I drank my share, and a couple other guys share along with it, and that because because they told us that well, when the airplane landed and they opened the doors and we started down the stairs, that's when reality hit. That's the humidity factor over there. I mean, it was a slap in the face, because you're used to an air-conditioned airplane. Now the airplane from from California to Florida was a military aircraft, so it wasn't air conditioned, you know. But once we got onto a civilian aircraft and that, you know, and then we were afforded the air conditioning. But you know, when they opened those doors and you started down those steps, man, it hit you. And a lot of guys, some of the airmen there and that stuff, who had done prior service in Vietnam, said, "This is your wake-up call. You know, this is what it's going to be like when you get over Nam."
So this is in the Philippines when you get off the plane in the Philippines.
Yeah.
It was that bad in the
Oh,
Philippines.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and that it was a reality check in that, and they weren't wrong. You know, because when we landed in Vietnam, and again, you know, I landed at Ben Hoa Airport. We came in during the night, and as a pilot was, you know, getting in the aircraft situation, he was banking in for a landing, and all of a sudden the landing lights on the airfield started going off. I mean, we could see this, and he made an announcement over the phone that at that time they were under attack. They were, you know, I don't know if it was mortar attack, rocket attack, or whatever in that, but he told us that he was very low on fuel and that he would stay up as long as he could, but if push came to shove, you know, he was going to land, you know, one way or the other.
Brian, can we take a time out for a minute? Now we're back again, and we're going to use this map so that you can explain where all you were and what all you did. So show us where you said you landed, please.
Okay, when I first landed in from the Philippines into Vietnam, I landed right here at Ben Hoa, and
what was your reaction when you got off the plane there?
Scared, you know, hot, miserable, a little bit in shock. When we landed, as the plane was coming into land, we landed, it was approximately about 11 o'clock at night. And at that time, the pilot, as he was banking in, you know, to get, to come in on the landing strip and that, we started, you know, there was lights, you know, for the runway, and they started going out. And at that time, he came over the intercom system and told us at that time that they were shelling, you know, the airfield. So what they did is all the lights went out, but on certain parts of the area of close to the landing field, down in these little gullies, there was flares, red flares down there, which actually helped, you know, the pilot go ahead and, you know, and bring it down. Then from there, basically from...
How long were you there?
Ben Hoa, I was there for about a week.
What did you do there?
Something extraordinary. I drew guard duty a couple times, and I also drew a duty that a lot of Vietnam vets, which is burning excrement. In other words, burning crap, you know. They had these 50-gallon drum barrels that were cut out. You had basically outhouses there to do your business in, and they had to have somebody to burn them and that stuff. So they drug these 50-gallon drums out that they'd been cut in half, and you drug them out with a shepherd's hook, which was a long metal hook, and you poured diesel fuel on it and threw a match in there and stirred it up like you would stir a pot.
You had to stand there and stir it?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. And that was kind of
Did you have a mask on or anything?
No, nope. There was no such thing as, you know, a gas mask. I mean, I'm not saying if you were equipped with a gas mask, you were probably smart to have it on, but you know, at that time, I had not been issued any of my, you know, field gear or anything like that, so I had no choice. But yeah, and you do this for an 8-hour, 10-hour day. I mean, you started at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you might be stirring stuff until 6 o'clock at night.
So
So
they're just bringing
barrel
after barrel.
barrel after barrels pulled out and that stuff, and you douse it with diesel fuel and throw a lit match and stir away and that until most of it's gone, and then they turn around and somebody else they'll set them over to the side, let them somewhat cool down, and then there'll be like a hole down there, and they'll dump what's left out of it into that hole. So that was a newbie thing there. Anybody that first got into Vietnam and that stuff, that was kind of your penance for having to be there. Hey.
Look at the camera more.
Oh, okay, but yeah, it was kind of crazy. But
so
then
you said you did guard duty. Who you guarding in guard duty?
Well, basically at the replacement camp, and that you do guard duty, guarding the perimeter of the base camp, and that was another funny thing that I won't say funny, but a situation happened the second night that I was there at the base camp. I drew guard duty, and you do 2-hour shifts from 6 to 8. If you draw 6 to 8, and then they have an 8 to 10 and 10 to 12, and then you go back, you've got 12 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 6 in the morning. Well, I drew the 6 to 8, and then a 12 to 2 was my my next tour out there, and we got out there and we had a M60 machine gun. There's usually a 3-man group. You had a guy that operated a field phone, could operate the field phone, and then you had a gunner and a loader, somebody to feed the machine gun. And we went out, excuse me, and I guess it was about 100 in the morning, 1 o'clock in the morning, and all of a sudden we heard this rustling. We had concertina wire, barbed wire stretched out so far, and then there was another kind of an open area, and then more concertina wire, and then the jungle was there, and all of a sudden that night we heard some noises. We heard what sounded like branches breaking on a tree and that, and they also had trip flares set out there in the concertina wire, and all of a sudden, we heard this poof, go off, and it was a trip flare. It went up in the air, and it, we used to call them pop-ups, but anyway, it went up in the air, opened up, and that, and an experience I'll never forget. There was this elephant, a bull elephant, I mean tusk and all, and that, and apparently, he had tripped the flare, so our field phone rang, immediately, and it was the sergeant of the guard, and he was wanting to know because they had seen the reaction of the flare going up in that, and they wanted to know what was going on, and for some reason I got the phone, and I told him, I said, I said, Sergeant, you're not going to believe this, and he says, what's the matter? And I said, there's an elephant out here, and he said, first thing he said, what are you guys drinking out there and that? And I said, man, we ain't drinking nothing, and we ain't smoking nothing and that stuff. I said, there's a bull elephant out here with tusks and that, and he got, he says, I'm coming out there, and he says, if I find any empty beer cans or any kind of weed that you guys been smoking and that stuff, he says, I'm going to put you on report, all of you. And and by that time the flare had gone down, and so he came out in the Jeep and that, and like I said, we had our own in the bunker. We had our own personal pop-up flares and that, and so he told me to go ahead and launch a flare, and I launched a flare, and there was nothing there. I mean, nothing. We don't know what happened to him, where he went. Never heard him leave. Didn't know anything in that, but consequently, the next day is when I drew the crap burning detail and that for, I think it was a penance and that stuff, basically because, we drug him out from his office and that, and back at the compound, and he wasn't happy about that. So the next day I drew the SB burning situation and that. So
well, did the other two guys on your
oh
crew?
Yeah, they were with me.
But did they have to do some punishment?
Oh
too?
yeah, they were with me the next day. All three of us had that duty. Yeah. Oh yeah, and that stuff. Yeah, he didn't. He didn't take it out strictly on me, because I answered the phone and that. But no, we all three of us drew that. But consequently, like I said, after Saigon, or down, and bear with me again.
Down here.
Yeah, right here and that stuff. From there, I turned around and after I spent approximately 2.5 weeks down in Saigon, which I got to real briefly say this. I drew a duty down there that what I thought was going to be my whole tour in Vietnam, which was working at a communication center. It was air conditioned. We lived in hotels. Those were air conditioned. I thought, yeah, I could do this tour a year over here. I can do this standing on my head, But like I said, at that time, I was an E3 BFC, and I was in an E6 slot, staff sergeant slot. And after about 2.5 weeks, he turned around and he showed up. And unfortunately, that's when I found out I was getting transferred. So we had a map similar to this at the communication center. And the first sergeant, when I came in, he told me, he says, I can't keep you. He said, we're going to transfer you to the 36th Signal Company, and they're out of Da Nang. So I immediately walked around and I looked, and I'm looking all around this area for Da Nang. I couldn't. He says, no, son. He says, unfortunately, Da Nang is up here. Well, from here to there, I don't know if you can see it, from there to there, that's the DMZ. And I thought, oh man, yeah, not good, not good, So consequently, excuse me, I flew from, again, from Benoit, and turned around and came up here to Chu Lai, and then from Chu Lai, I turned around and made it to Da Nang. And
how'd you get from Chu Lai to Da Nang?
Helicopter on that one, and I flew C-130 to Chu Lai, and then from Chu Lai to Da Nang, and I flew by helicopter. And once I got there, then I was initiated into becoming what they called an RTO, which is a radio telephone operator. And
anybody fly with you from
no.
Chu Lai?
No, I was by myself. I was the only one on the chopper at that time, other than the crew, chopper crew.
What kind of a chopper was it?
Huey, yeah, UH-1, and it leaves a distinct memory on you, and that when you fly in one of these, it's to this day, if I hear a Huey, I can hear a Huey 2 miles away, and they have a distinct sound, and it's just something that's embedded, in your mind and that. But yeah, then like I said, I was up there at Da Nang, and that's where I spent the greater portion of my time up in the I Corps area.
Did you get out in the jungle at all?
Yeah, I was out in the bush for about 6 months. When they initiated, they had a major communication center up there, but I wasn't assigned to it. I was assigned to 36th Signal Company, and when I got there, that's when they informed me that they were going to make me an RTO, which is we like to use the phrase radio transmitting operator instead of telephone operator, but it is what it is. You call it a radio telephone operator or radio transmitting operator. Which then they turn around and they give you a mobile unit. It's approximately about 35 pounds. You have it on your back, and you usually carry 2 batteries along with various sorted grenades, smoke grenades, and and basically what you do is you stay with, you're no farther than about 2 feet or 3 feet away from your platoon leader, and which then you transmit anything from incoming round, or rounds going out, rounds coming in.
Well, are you transmitting things that your leader tells you to transmit?
Right.
Or can you transmit on your own?
No, and everything, unless something happens to him, if he would be wounded or something like that, then I could take the initiative on that. But mine was directly, anything that he told me to transmit, that's what I transmitted on that. So
what other gear? I mean, how much did all this equipment weigh?
Well, you see a lot of guys over there, they wore full-size packs, which they called them Alice packs, which you could put a lot of gear on there. With me, I had the fanny pack, which was underneath the radio, and basically the total amount with the radio, the smoke grenades, the fanny pack, which I packed extra ammo. I also, my pistol belt, I also carried at least 3 canteens of water. Socks. Socks were a God-given thing over there. If the jungle over there will eat your feet, eat your feet right off in that if you don't, keep your feet, taken care of in that. But I'd say probably a total of about, anywhere from 55 to 65 pounds.
And how much did you weigh at the time?
Well, at that time, I wasn't, probably $140, 140 pounds and that. After a while, I even got down as low as 120 pounds and that. Like I said, the heat and humidity is horrendous. There was no chance of staying dry. There was times, monsoon season would come in, and believe it or not, there was a little bit of a break. You were still wet, but you weren't sweating all the time and that stuff. In a sense, it sounds kind of stupid for me to say this, but in a sense, the rain kind of cooled you off, and there was a temperature difference when monsoons come in. But out in the bush, man, you just you had to stay hydrated. You had to drink. You had to take a lot of water.
That's why you took the extra canteens?
Oh yeah, and because a lot of times the fact that if you didn't get a resupply out there, you ended up having to get your water from any source that you could. Might be a mud hole, might be a river, and of course there's all kinds of different organisms in there and that, and of course you had purification tablets.
Did you have to use them?
Oh yeah. They tasted horrible. One of the tricks that I did learn over there, and one of the things that worked for me, was that when I first got over there, a guy had told me, he says, you got family at home? And I said, yeah. He said, tell them to send you pre-sweetened grape Kool-Aid. And I said, grape Kool-Aid? He says, yeah. He says, for some reason, it'll take the iodine taste out of the purification tablets and that. So I wrote home to an uncle that was a World War II vet. Matter of fact, he was at the Battle of the Bulge, and my uncle, he also sent me these grape Kool-Aid packs, and sent me a ton of cotton socks, which I appreciated to the day and that stuff, because that's one thing over there. Your feet, if you immersion foot, jungle rot, whatever you want to call it, and that the jungle is really hard on your feet, on a grunt's feet, and that's so you had to take care of your feet and that.
Were you able to do that? Did you have any problems with your feet?
I had, not a lot, but I did have some where I got to the point where I would carry as many pair of extra socks as I could, and I would take those socks, and I changed socks regularly.
How often?
oh shoot, sometimes even 3 hours, every 3 hours. You know, anytime that we got a chance for a break, whether it be a 10-minute break, man, the boots come off and the socks got changed and the foot powder went on.
What'd you do with the socks that you were taking off?
Well,
Did you keep them?
I would keep them and then I'd rinse them out. And that is, a lot of times that, I mean, you didn't carry any type of detergent or anything with you, but, at a mud hole or someplace and that stuff, I'd, go ahead and rinse them out. And, if we were going to be someplace for a few hours and that stuff, and let them, dry out in the sun. Yeah, so, but.
Now, where were you when you were going out into these jungle areas?
Oh, well, basically, everything close to Da Nang and that stuff, out through around through this area, up through here and that. That was for the first about 5 months that I was there. Shortly afterwards, we had a change of command, and we got he was a Mustang captain. He had worked himself up from the ranks and that. He became our CO, and then shortly after that, he had made major. That's when he found out that that I had a TS clearance, and
what's
said,
a TS clearance?
Top secret clearance. That was basically for coding and decoding of messages. So that's when he decided to pull me out of the field, out of the bush, and they made me a message runner then. So when communications broke down, whether it be up here to Dongha or Wei or Quezon or Quang Tri, anything up in the I-Corps area, if the communications broke down, then I jumped on a Huey, on a helicopter and I delivered these messages, to various to various units, whether it's Marine or Army, didn't make any difference.
Did you have to go into hot zones?
Not so much. Not so much on that time. I mean, there was a chance that, wherever I went, whether I went to Quang Tri or Wei or whatever, and that there would be a chance that they might get shelled or something like that, or they might have a firefight coming on. But it wasn't like the first, 5.5 months of going out and being out in the bush and that. This was kind of a lot easier on me. Like I said, he was a good CO. I liked him tremendously.
Well, during the period of time you're out in the bush, did you get in any firefights?
I was in a few operations, a few and that. Most of our stuff was basically, the stuff that we went out and did, which they called S&D, which was search and destroy, which if there was any kind of VC or NVA activity in that, then we went out and searched this area to see what we would find in that. Sometimes nothing.
What's the most significant thing you found at any time on your search and destroy mission?
We had got word one time that there was a group of Green Berets that did an operation up towards, more or less, I guess, out towards Laos, and that we weren't supposed to be in Laos or Cambodia or anything like that, but a lot of times, there was stuff, operations, contracted in there and stuff like that. But we had heard that they were missing. There was 2 Green Berets that were missing, and we were told to, see if we could find any type of, information, whether there were any kind of signs of, whether they were captured or whatever the case may be. Unfortunately, we did find these 2. They had been captured. They had been tortured.
Were they still alive?
No. Unfortunately, they had been beheaded. They had been tortured, and they had been beheaded. And
did they still have their dog tags? Could you tell who they were, or had those been stolen from them?
Well, there was the dog tags were gone and that stuff, but there were still parts of the uniform, with their name on it.
So you could
stuff
tell
like
who
that.
they were.
Yeah, you could tell who they were.
So did you guys extract them?
Yeah, we extracted them. We called in for a medevac chopper and that stuff, and they took them out. And at that time, we got a sense of
how bad they were.
Oh no, we developed a sense of brutality then. I hate to say it, but I didn't want to let anybody, any type of Vietnamese, I don't care if it was a child, if it was a woman or anything, I didn't want to have any kind of contact, with them at all. I had developed a real bad case of bitterness. I was mad. I was pissed off. I was vengeful. If something, I just didn't care. I was to the point where I wanted to hurt somebody, and I just, for a 19-year-old, I celebrated my 19th birthday over there.
Where were you on your birthday?
I was actually on my birthday and that stuff. I turned around, and that's when I joined the 36 Signal Company up there. Yeah, and
you have a cake?
No cake, but we had a couple cases of beer and that. So that was a good thing about it. And that, but there's just so much after a while that you see so much, and you get to the point where a lot of times you just, I don't know how to put it in words.
Well, did you ever have to use your weapon in any of these?
I mean, as far as killing somebody, yeah.
What were you using, your rifle or pistol?
The rifle at the time. I never had any close combat, so far as hand-to-hand or anything like that. But yeah, I did open up on a couple BC and that, and I did watch them go down.
Was this out in the jungle, or was
yeah.
You were attacking a base?
Well, we were attacked. We got attacked by a fire. We were at our fire base, and this is when I lost a good friend of mine. We were repelling an attack that night. We had what they called sappers. They were trying to get in, and what they were trying to do was destroy the communication bunker, the ammo dump, and the command center. And a friend of mine and I were manning the bunker at that time, and manning an M60 machine gun. We had an RPG, rocket-propelled grenade, that hit the front of the bunker, which kind of put us both in a daze for a second. And my friend was manning the gun. He was actually operating, and I was feeding it to him. And we were laying down, suppressing fire, out into the concertina wire. And all of a sudden, his gun went silent. The 60 went silent. And at that time and that stuff, I mean, it's pitch black. I couldn't see anything. I didn't know where my flashlight was or anything like that. And unfortunately, he got shot.
Oh.
And he was shot in the face, and he killed him. And I just...
Did you take over the machine gun, or?
No, by that time they had called a ceasefire. So far as the enemy trying to get in, they didn't get in. They didn't really destroy anything and that stuff.
Why did they call them the sappers? Just for somebody that might be reading.
Gosh, the terminology so far as sappers, I don't know how that really originated. To be honest with you, they were ones that. No matter how much concertina wire or fortifications that you had stretched out in your area, which at that time we strung beer cans and put rocks inside the beer cans so it would make noise and that. But these sappers and that stuff, they were swift at getting in through they could slide inside through this concertina wire. They could cut the wire without making any noise and that. Like I said, I'm not really exactly sure how the terminology originated and that stuff, but that's basically what we called them was sappers would they were going to get in and try to do as much destruction as they could.
Did you ever see one and see what equipment and?
I seen a dead one time and it's.
What was he carrying?
At that time, and that he had like a pair of snips and that stuff, and what you would call a satchel charge, okay. or a device, to blow something up,
right.
Similar to that. But yeah, I never saw a chance. I never seen. Most of their attacks were usually early in the morning. It could be anywhere from 10 to 12 or 0100. 0100 to 3 o'clock in the morning and that. And a lot of the times, what you got was you get harassment fire. They might fire in 4 or 5 rockets or 6 rockets and that stuff, just enough to keep you on edge, and then nothing happen the rest of the night. Or right pre-dawn, they would turn around, like say 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, 2:30, 03 in the morning, and they would fire in 3 or 4 rockets or launch some type of harassment fire, and then that would be it. It's just enough to keep you on edge. Well,
besides this incident where the sappers were trying to get in and your buddy got killed, did you have any other instances where you were defending an all-out attack on your fire base?
Well, 6810. That's when the VC and the NVA and that stuff attacked various spots. So far as in and right outside of at that time, I was a messenger duty then and that stuff. So I was back at the base camp, not so much out at the fire base and that. And then we repelled attacks then, and that was up, like I said, that was up in the Da Nang area and that stuff, right in through here, and that was probably 68 Tet, because they struck all over the country.
68 Tet, that's what customarily called the Tet Offensive.
Tet Offensive, yes sir. Yep.
And now, what are you're flying in a Huey at this time to go into messages, or some other helicopter?
No, most of my flying time and that stuff was in Hueys and that. Every once. One extreme time, I flew in what they, I don't know the name of the aircraft, and we called it an Otter. It was I know one thing, it was an aircraft that they could not use over here. It wasn't certifiable in the States, but for some reason they could use it over there. And it would carry something like 10 to 12 passengers.
That was a prop plane, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a prop plane. Yeah.
I've flown in one of those. Up
have you?
Up in Canada.
Oh, okay. But yeah, but like I said, yeah, the Tet Offensive and that stuff. Like I said, they struck. I'm losing my grip here, but anyway, they struck all over South Vietnam. I mean, Saigon got hit extremely a lot. Just about every major military base, from Dong Ha all the way down, all through this area, and that stuff was hit and that. Da Nang, where I was at, we had certain, I won't say it was a full-scale thing, but we had reported attacks, at our base camp and that, but so far as a full blown out, no. And we've talked about a fire base. Explain to somebody that's going to be listening to this what a fire base is. A main base camp is a camp that usually there's what we call hooches, or there's tents that you live in. With regular beds, as far as you had a regular bunk bed type, situation. That a base camp was you usually had a mess hall. You might be fortunate enough to have an enlisted man's club or a NCO club, which is a place that you go to drink your leisure time. But a fire base is basically outstretched outward, out in the boonies somewhere, and you're defending a certain area out there. It might be a small village. There might not be anything of importance out there. I mean, so far as it might be an area that could be contacted. It could be traveled by VC or by NDA and that. So, but a fire base out usually out was out in what we called out in the bush or out in the boonies and that. Your main base camp that was usually back in a fairly safe area.
Back at base camp, did you have any Vietnamese men or women that helped to do things?
Yeah,
around
there
base?
was people that worked actually on the base and that stuff. Supposed to be cleared, supposed to be good, but you never could tell. I mean, they could be VC. I mean, I never had any type of problems other than, like I said, after that one incident where I didn't trust people and that stuff, I steered clear. I didn't have any type of communications with them if I didn't have to.
Even the alleged friendly ones you didn't want to have anything to do with?
Yeah, friendly ones I didn't want to have anything to do with either.
Now, did you get into any villages in any of your duties?
Well, we got into small, a couple times, 2 small villas, which were basically, 2 or 3 huts, maybe 4 huts or something like that. They were farmers, mostly rice farmers in that situation. But
did you have to be real careful when you went into there in case?
Yeah, you took everything. You stayed alert on any time and that stuff. If you didn't, you were stupid. I mean, even back at the base camp, and that I was always watching. I was always checking out. Personnel, everything else. I was, where I go, what I watch, what I seen, what I ate. I just stayed aware of everything. I tried to, and I didn't take anything for granted. Because like I said, you could, at any given time, a rocket could come in, a mortar round could come in, whatever, and I truthfully have to say that, like I said, I stayed aware as much as possible.
So, we've got you up here, and then you got a new commanding officer, and he thinks that you ought to be out of there and into a communication center.
Yeah, he basically, what he did is he kept me around the base camp more. I wasn't out in the fire base anymore, so I wasn't going out into the boonies or anything like that, and I stayed basically back at the base camp for probably the last four months of my tour. And
anything exciting or exceptional happened while you're there?
No, not really. Just I'd fly out. Sometimes I wouldn't. If communications was up, then I'd basically I was there doing menial tasks, stuff like that. But the only time, like I said, I did anything is when if the communications broke down, they needed me to, jump on a helicopter and go ahead and deliver, messages.
So you have this. You and your 2 other buddies on the crew are doing the burning chore.
Oh yeah.
How did they pick other guys for situations like that? Was it some kind of punishment for something they'd done?
Basically, yeah, you could call it. If somebody screwed up, basically you drew that, and then, like I said, there was guys that were permanent screw-ups. I hate to say it. I mean, there was guys that, that's all they did was, that menial task, because they were, they couldn't be trusted to do anything else. They were, whether they, got drunk or mouthy or fighting or whatever the case may be or something like that. But
if you're doing that, at least you're not out in the bush.
Yeah, and a lot of them I think did that just kind of a smart way to say, hey, I'm not going to be out there and get my my butt shot at and that stuff. So but I think a lot of it too was anytime that you got new people in, it was kind of a initiation process.
Here's what you don't want to do.
Yeah, really. Yeah, and so you're either a screw up or you're a FNG, friggin' new guy. And yeah, I mean, and then like I said, at some of the base camps, that duty was transferred over to the Vietnamese too. That worked there. I mean, there was. I very seldom, like I said, I didn't want to have any contact with them. I kind of, when I was back at the base camp, we had what they called a hooch maid, which she would come in and clean and, so far as make your bed, take your dirty sheets out. They had a laundry service there and stuff like that. But I got to the point where, I did my own. I didn't trust them.
You just didn't want anything to do with them.
I just didn't want anything to do with them. And that, like I said, I didn't, even though, a lot of the guys didn't have any problems with them or anything like that, it's like, hey, that's me. I just didn't trust them.
How was your chow over there at the different locations? How was your chow?
Food?
How was the food?
Well, when I was down in Saigon, it was great. And that, so far as going up north and that stuff, when I was out at the fire base, a lot of sea rats, sea rations, which weren't bad. I mean, certain things, tasted good. Certain things didn't taste good.
What did they do with the scraps, uneaten food, or was the food always eaten?
Well, for the most part, in that stuff, I can't.
Did you have a garbage dump or a trash dump?
Well, there was to a certain extent, yeah, but a lot of now so far as the fire base and that stuff, we ate just about everything what there was. We turned around and we destroyed the cans and stuff like that. We were told to destroy anything to make it. I have to give the Vietnamese people credit. They were very innovative. They, stuff that we would take for granted that didn't work, like a battery, like an like a DC or regular flashlight battery and that stuff. Somehow, they would figure out, there would be just enough juice in there that could set a mine off or could set an explosive issue off. We were told to destroy everything, make it non-usable and that, and what you couldn't destroy you buried, and bury it deep. And that. So, but I mean it was to the point where, like I said, I can remember outside of gosh, I was trying to think. There wasn't case on it. It must have been way. I seen a house, a regular hooch or a hut, built strictly out of beer cans. I mean a whole. I wish I had a picture, but like I said, unfortunately, I told you prior to this conversation here and that stuff, but. Some of my memorabilia had been destroyed, but I had a picture of this house. It was completely made out of Budweiser beer cans. I'm talking roof, walls, interior, chairs, table, the whole 9 yards. And when you see somebody that can do that, then you think to yourself, and that's one of the reasons we were told to destroy everything and that stuff, because they would find some kind of use for it.
Some way to use it.
Some way to use it, and usually, use it against you. So that's batteries were a big thing, and that they told us, you destroy. any type of batteries in that. I mean, make sure that they are non-functional, that they, you know, they can't be used.
Did you shoot them and ruin them that way?
Well, we turned around and smashed them, you know, and they usually sledgehammer or something like that, and go ahead and just beat them into a pulp.
You talked about burying stuff deep. Let me ask you this question. Were you ever asked to be a tunnel rat?
I did it one time. Only because the guy that normally did our, you know, that was our normal tunnel rat was on R&R. And
explain a little bit what a tunnel rat is.
Well, tunnel rat is a guy, when we would find holes in the ground that would lead, the Vietnamese, like I said, they were very functional. I never saw them. I never had an opportunity to see it, but from talk from other guys who had been tunnel rats and that stuff, they had gone into areas where they had dug out. There were spaces in there for hospitals, where they had medical stuff. There was meeting rooms, ammo rooms, and this is all underground. This is, you know, dug underneath the ground. My unfortunate thing was that our guy was gone, and I was asked to go in, and I got in approximately about 30 feet, and I have a thing about claustrophobia. I can't stand to be in tight spots, and the thing about it was that it was closing in, it was getting narrow. My shoulders were starting to, you know, hit the, you know, sides of the wall. Plus, part of the tunnel started to disintegrate, started to come down on me, and I panicked. And unfortunately, going inside one of these tunnels, it's usually, you know, if you go in forward, you're going to have to come out backward. You can't turn around, you know, in one of these tunnels. And the VC were known to put booby traps in there. Might be punji sticks, might be what we called the one step, which they had a snake over there that it was what they call bamboo viper, and the one steppers and that stuff. If this snake bit you, you take one step and you're dead. You know, that's how strong the venom is in this snake, and they were known to, like I said, you know, position them, you know, snakes into the tunnels. They were known to put charges, you know, booby traps, you know, explosive charges into the tunnels and that stuff. Could be punji sticks in there too. So I mean, it was to the point where, you know, like I said, I hold my hat up to anybody who became a tunnel rat, because they, to me, that was one thing that, no, there's no way I could do it.
Sounds like that's one of the most dangerous assignments you could
Probably
have.
one of the most dangerous jobs that you could have. And that,
Wow.
And like I said, I give them all due credit that they deserve, because I know myself, no, I couldn't do it. You know, and we had, well, like I said, the guy that was in our unit that did it was on R&R. He was actually on his second tour over in Vietnam. So, you know, he'd already done this for a year, and he was into his second tour and still doing it and that. And some guys said you had to be a little crazy, but maybe that's true. I don't know, but I know I didn't want no part of it, you know.
Speaking of being crazy, did you have a nickname over there?
Yeah, my last name, yeah, this, I'm going to say this thing's getting heavy on me.
Well,
yeah.
Where were you when you left? Would you
Oh,
show on
okay.
when you left Vietnam?
When I finally left Da Nang and that stuff, I flew from Da Nang all the way down, and bear with me because I don't have my eyes on, and that, right down here to Cam Ranh Bay.
Okay.
And I flew out of Cam Ranh Bay, and you know, that was the Freedom Bird home. It was kind of a funny situation. When I left Da Nang, we had a C-130. Well, I just come in from a message run. I'd been on a chopper, and I come in, and my driver was waiting for me and you know, take me back to the base camp. And when I got back there, or before I got back there, he told me, he says, your orders have come in, you know. And I said, okay, cool. I said, when am I leaving? He says, today. And I said, how long? And he says, man, you got about 45 minutes, And he says, I got to bring you back up here to, to the airport. And I said, okay. So, we went back to the base camp. I had enough time, to pick up, what stuff that I needed. And I started giving stuff away, to the guys that were there,
What kind of stuff are you talking about?
Oh, my field gear, canteens, any type of weapons I had that, I couldn't take with me or anything like that.
You're not allowed to bring any weapons home?
No, you were not supposed to. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but, but yeah, you were supposed to turn everything in.
And did you?
I turned everything in. I'll be honest with you, Ned. I didn't bring anything back. Now, come to find, like I said, once I got on the plane, well, there was an incident. When we got out, we jumped on. We were on a C-130, and we were going to head down to Cameron Bay. As the plane started to disembark, take off. You get ready to take off, and they have what they call JADO packs. Okay, JADO packs are boosters and that stuff. It's like a mini jet, and there's one position on each wing, and it gives the aircraft enough lift to get up off of the runway. And anyway, so the pilot was positioning us to get ready in that, and which a lot of times they'll start a rolling run. Since this is a prop plane, a propeller plane, and then, when they, get the momentum going, then they kick those, JADO packs in. Well, as we started, the plane started, kind of wiggling, and it finally, we started sliding sideways, and we went off, and all of a sudden, it kind of tipped over, it didn't tip over, but it kind of tilted. Well, to find out what had happened, air traffic controller up there at Da Nang airport was bringing 2 F-4 Phantoms in on our runway. As we were leaving, they were bringing 2 in. So our pilot had no chance. He had no opportunity. He had to do something, so he had to get off the runway. So, and that's what he did. He slid off the runway. He got the airplane off the runway, which then did some damage to the landing gear. And so we had to disembark from there, and we had to turn around and wait for another. Oh gosh, I can't. I want to say an hour. Might have been a little bit shorter. Might have been a little bit longer. Then we caught another C-130, and I flew down to Cameron Bay. And when we got down there to disembark, there was a guy down there, and he was calling names off. And the airport was right here, and so we were getting off of one plane. This guy's standing over here calling names off. And I hear this guy, he butchered my name. And I knew, because my last name is pronounced Urmanic. But if you look at it, some people just have a hard time trying to, pronounce it. So, thusly, prior to that, I had developed a nickname called Maniac, because everybody could not pronounce my name, my last name. So, consequently, when I was in, when I first went in, I got that handle, or that name, and it stuck with me, through my whole service time. Which, anyway, so this guy was trying to call my name out. I'd come to find out that since the delay up in Da Nang had pushed me back, my flight was ready to go. Well, I had $375. Now, I'm gonna give you a terminology. It's called MPC, Military Payment Certificate. When you went to Vietnam, you automatically turned in any type of American money, coin, folding greenbacks, whatever. That all got turned in, and they would issue you what they called Military Payment Certificate, which was, what we call funny money. And that, I mean, it was good, but so I had all this funny money, and as they called my name, I asked this guy, I said, hey, look, you know, I said, I got $375 of, you know, MPC here. Can I get this exchanged? And this sergeant looked at me, he says, sure, no problem, you can get it exchanged, but he says, you're supposed to be on that flight right there. Now, if we take you off that flight, we don't know exactly when you're going to be leaving. It might be tomorrow, it might be 2 weeks from now, it could be a month from now. So I thought, nah, I'm getting on the plane. So I like to feel that I ended up paying for my flight back. I took $375 in MPC. Now, the other crazy thing about it was that getting back here into the States and that I couldn't tell them that I had this money on me, because you were supposed to exchange everything while you were over there. You were not supposed to bring this money back with you. So, you know, in fact, you know, like I said, that became the thing. I told them, I said, yeah, well, I paid, you know, for my ride back. Now, I still had friends over there, but I couldn't until my next duty station. Then I, in turn, sent that MPC back, the military payment. I sent it back to a friend of mine who was going to exchange it for me, you know, into greenbacks, because he was getting ready to rotate, you know, to come back to the States and that. And they turned and they changed the script. So they changed the color of the money and, you know, and certain details on the money. So he couldn't do anything, so he ended up, you know, returning the money back to me. I still retain some of this at home, and there's a museum, a World War II, or
it's a military
museum up in Germantown, which some of that money is up there on display that I donated to the museum up here. So, but
so you're flying out of Cameron Bay?
I flew out of
where?
I flew out of Cameron Bay, and we went to Osaka, Japan, for refueling. And I had just, like I said, I had just come out of the field, so I was in my jungle fatigues. I didn't have a chance to change into any type of khakis or, you know, clean uniforms or anything like that. So when I got on the plane at Cameron Bay, the only seat left, there was 2 officers. There was a major in the Army and a lieutenant commander, and they're all decked out, you know, in their khakis and that stuff, clean shaven, everything else. And I smell like the back end of a donkey's rear end and that stuff. I mean, I stunk, you know, really bad. But that was the only, you know, they had no choice. I had to sit, you know, I had to sit between them. So when we got to Osaka, Japan, we disembarked, and we were there, you know, for, I don't know, 45 minutes, maybe, you know, maybe an hour or something like that. I don't know where these, you know, 2 gentlemen went, you know, but when I got back on a plane, I had all 3 seats to myself. And that. So from there, we flew from Osaka back to Seattle, SeaTac Airport and that. And
when you get to Seattle, you don't have any American money.
No, I don't have anything at all. We turned around. We were told when we disembarked, they took us from SeaTac Airport, loaded us on buses, and they told us at the time there was protesters outside of the airport gates and that. And unfortunately, they were throwing feces, you know, at the buses, calling us baby killers, calling us a bunch of names, stuff like that. We actually begged the bus driver to stop, to let us off. He was a former, you know, military man. He had been to Nam. He says, I can't do it, guys. He says, I'll lose my job. You know, I said, I can't afford to lose my job and that. But, you know, so, you know, like I said, so we went through the protesters. We went to Fort Lewis, Washington. Excuse me. And we got there, and anybody that was in jungle fatigues, which I was, and I can't think of how many of us there were, but we were told to form a line and that, and even some of the guys that were in khakis and that, form a line, and we went into this building, and they told us to strip, take your clothes off. And so, the guys wearing the khakis and that stuff are kind of like, huh? What's going on? I mean, me, I can understand. I stunk. I needed a shower and that stuff. I needed clean clothes. And, but anyway, they brought in these rolling tables, and they had these 50-gallon drums in there. And you took all your clothing, if you had underwear on, which 90% of the guys over there, you didn't wear underwear in Vietnam. That didn't happen. But anyway, took all those clothes and you threw them in these barrels, and we asked them what they were doing, and they took them outside and they burned them. They burned it, and because they were afraid of any type of parasites, something that you would be bringing back, from in country there. And then you got a shower. You went in and took a shower. You got clean, fresh clothes.
That was like going to heaven, wasn't it?
Yeah, and you got a steak dinner, which was nice. Guys that were ETSing out, they went ahead, in other words, they were getting out of the service, out of the military. They went ahead and billeted them, put them in barracks and that. For us guys that still had time left to do, they turned around and we went to payroll. We got money, and then we, in turn, they took us to the airport or bus station. However, you were going to, find transportation back home.
So where'd you go from there? Did you come home?
I came home, yeah. I caught a flight. I flew back standby because it was cheaper than paying for a regular ticket and that. And so I flew back from Seattle to Chicago, and I was in Chicago and airport, and then they put me on a little small prop airplane. I mean, it maybe seated 6 people and that stuff. At that time, Cincinnati Airport was nothing, down here. I mean, it's not like CVG is now. You actually, when you disembark from an airplane, you disembarked out on the runway and actually walked in, to CVG, walked into the airport and that. So
was that the same location, or was it at Lunken?
It was something similar to Lunken, but it was northern Kentucky. And I mean, it was bigger than Lunken, but there were certain parts of the airport where, like I said, they would roll the steps up to you outside, and you come off the steps and and come on out. Like I said, I flew back in on a. I'm not a small plane fanatic or paraphrase. I can't think of what the name of it, like a Cessna or something like that. But it was probably 6 passengers in that, and so when I came in and that stuff, they just opened the doors and we walked into the airport and that. And
did you have any family there to greet you?
No. Like I said, at that time, my mother, my father being gone, I was an only child. I really didn't, didn't have any connections with my mom. My grandmother at that time, she couldn't travel, because of her age or anything like that. And, so I think that was when that, did I ask for Ronnie then and that stuff? I think so. Her brother came.
Her being who?
My wife Sharon. Her brother came down, and who was in the Marine Corps, which spent a tour over in Vietnam also. Yeah, he served a year before me, and that he came down and picked me up in a brand new Pontiac GTO and that.
So did you have any more military duty you had to do?
Yeah, I come back unassigned, which I didn't have any military orders assigned me to a base. So we had what you filled out, what they called a dream sheet, okay? If you still had time to do in the service and that, you filled out this paper, this dream sheet, and I had put down any type of military base close to Ohio, Fort Knox, Fort Campbell, Fort Jackson, South Carolina. I didn't care as long as it was on the East Coast. That's what I wanted, you know. Nah, wrong, you know. I was home 2 weeks, and all of a sudden I get an official letter in the mail, and they told me, they said, your next duty station is Stuttgart, Germany. And I'm thinking, God, you gotta be kidding me, man. I just come back from Nam, a tour overseas, and I'm going back overseas again, you know. Not a happy guy. You know, I mean, it turned out to be okay, you know.
How did you get to Stuttgart?
Flew. You know,
commercial
this time
or military?
Oh, civilian this time, and stuff. Yeah, there was no military at all.
Where from did you fly?
Let's see. I guess I want to say LaGuardia, but I don't know if that was, you know, one of the airports out of New York City. And that, yeah, we flew to. Oh man, I can't think of the big, you know, air base in Germany. Rhine-Main or Rhine. I can't think. I've got a block and that stuff, but we flew there, and then we were transported to Stuttgart, and then, you know, like I said, come to find out, they basically didn't have anything for us to do. You know, we were all sergeants. We all from, you know, I had various MOSs or various duties that we had done in Vietnam, and so they stuck us in a replacement company, you know, for about 3.5 weeks, and then turned around, and there was 3 guys that were with me that came into Stuttgart, and me and 3 other guys, we ended up getting transferred down to Vicenza, Italy, and which then we went by train. When there was no flying at that time, and we went by train. And kind of a weird, funny thing is that as we traveled down through the various countries, Switzerland, before we got to the border of Switzerland, now we were all in uniform, and they told us at that time, we were all in what we called our dress greens, or dress uniform. We had to take our jacket off, we had to take our cap, place it flat on the seat next to us, and that, take our jacket off, fold it inside out, and place it on top of that. Now you could sit with your regular shoes, your pants, your shirt and tie, but traveling through Switzerland, you could not show any type of military memorabilia. You couldn't show any badges, you couldn't show any type of ribbons, no rank, no nothing, and it was made clear to us that you had to do this, or they would take you off the train. So all 4 of us, we turned around and we took all of our stuff off, set it down there. We traveled through Switzerland. As soon as we got off, you know, to the next border, and we were allowed to put our uniforms back on. So
from the time you took the uniforms back off, and before you put them back on, did anybody from Switzerland ever come on board the train?
There was a I don't know what you would call him. I guess like a policeman or something like that.
Security person?
Yeah, a security person that, you know, that actually walked, you know, through the train and that stuff. And, you know, it wasn't a conductor that would check in tickets or anything like that, but he was some kind of an official or something like that, and he, you know, looked in the various compartments, and you know, he never said anything, he never spoke to anybody or anything like that, but yeah, walked through the train, and I never saw him after. Once we got to the border and transferred over, and I never saw him after that. So, you know, I'm assuming that he was, you know, some type of security for Switzerland.
Now, where did the train take you?
It took us to Milan, Italy, and once we got to Milan, Italy, and then we were transferred by. I'm trying to think what kind of transportation I took to get down to Vicenza. I cannot be honest with you, Pat. I cannot remember if it was another train or whether we went by vehicle. I hate to say it, but it's just something that's blanked out of my mind, you know.
Now, before you came over to Germany, are you married at that time?
Okay, I got married my wife, Sharon, we were high school sweethearts, and we decided, she wanted to get married prior to me going into the service, and I said no. I decided at that time, and when it became apparent that I was going to go to Vietnam, I did not want to make her an 18 or 19-year-old widow, and so I refused to be married, for my period of time over in Vietnam. Now, when I came back, we kind of planned a little sneaky thing in that, and decided to get married. And so we got married, and we were one of the first couples to get married in Kentucky under the new Kentucky law that you did not need parents' consent. Because if you had to be 21 or older to get married.
In Kentucky.
In Kentucky.
In Ohio?
Or in Ohio, I'm sorry. But we decided, to go down. We, went down to Kentucky. She had a falsified affidavit, and me being in the military didn't make any difference. And so far as I don't think there was any restrictions at that time for me, but so it was mainly her. And so we went down and we actually got married right after Kentucky had changed their law. So then we were married June 14th of all. Never figured on the date, and I turn around and I find out, okay, number one, it's Flag Day. Number two, it's the Army's birthday. So I thought, man, this is ironic, that I get married on the Army's birthday and that.
So how old were you and how old was she?
At that time in '68, I was 20.
And how old was she?
She was 20. And 16 days later, I turned 21. On June the 30th. So
parents don't know this is going on.
No, her mom, had no idea and that stuff until we got back to where she could pick her stuff up, and we had already secretly arranged an apartment. We had bought certain necessities, dishes, bath towels, this, that, and the other, stuff like that, and I had
it all furnished.
Well, we had it all furnished.
When you went to Germany, was she allowed to come with you?
No.
When you went to Italy, was she allowed to come over?
Yes. Now, she did join me in Italy, and our oldest son was born there in Italy.
How long were you in Italy?
A little more than a year.
Were you doing your communications over there?
Yeah. It's put me right back into a regular communications center, and which I was a cryptographer at that time, and so I was able to code and decode messages.
And that base is still there.
Yeah.
Was there anything of interest to somebody who might be watching this of what your experience was in Italy?
Well, the thing about it, and what a lot of people do not realize, back in the late '60s, early '70s, and that a lot of parts of Italy, and that still were still under communist control. And due to that fact, there were certain countries that, with me having a top secret clearance, that I could not visit, even if I wanted to. One of them being my parents, or my dad and my grandparents' homeland, which was parts of Germany and Czechoslovakia. So I could not go there because they were still under communist control. And there was a lot of communist factions at that time in Italy also. So we were told, to avoid certain areas, because they were anti-American, and so there were certain places that we could go and certain places we couldn't go.
Did you live on base?
No, I did not live on base. At that time, when I finally sent for her to come over, which was about 3 months after I got over there, and I could not. The on-base housing was filled, so we lived out on the economy, which kind of was a plus to a certain extent, because I found out that if, you know, being on the economy, I tended to, you know, go out and I did a lot of things, you know, with the Italian people and that stuff. I tried to learn their customs instead of being the brash American, the hardcore American, and saying, well, you should, you know, abide by what I say. You know, I didn't believe in that. You know, it's their country. I'm a guest. I should, you know, go ahead and, you know, try to, you know, respect, you know, their things there and stuff like that, and you know, not be the, you know, the brash American and that. So so we did a lot of stuff, you know, on the side. You know, we ate a lot of Italian restaurants. We did a lot of shopping, you know, in Italian places. Matter of fact, I had my own Italian barber. You know, I'd rather go to a civilian barber than I would, you know, to a barber on the base and that. So, but it was.
When did you get out?
I got out December of 1969, and that. So far as regular duty or, you know, active duty in that, I stayed in the reserves until 1974, and I was in inactive reserves for about 2.5 years, and then I was in the active reserve for about 2.5 years, and approximately.
So did you and your wife and son come back together on the plane?
No. Nope. My wife and my son, you know, they came back approximately about 6 weeks prior to me coming back. And that
commercial or military?
Oh, they came back commercial. Yeah.
All right.
Unfortunately, and it's yeah. There was at that time they didn't do a lot of military. You know, in other words, you basically, you know, if I wanted her over there, I had to pay for it. If I wanted her, you know, to come home, I had to pay for it and that stuff. So, you know, the military didn't really, you know, well, their old saying was, we didn't issue you a wife or a child and that. So, so basically, if you had to do something and that stuff, you had to, you know, out of your pocket, you know, expenses and that.
So when you came from Italy, where did you come to?
Well, I landed in New York, and I can't remember. It might have been LaGuardia Airport at that time. For me to process out, I went to Brooklyn. There was a Ford up here called Ford Hamilton in Brooklyn, and basically it was just I mean, it wasn't a compound or anything, you know, not what you would classify as a military base. It's basically about like 2 blocks long. And it was a, you know, just, you know, a military post installation in that. And I stayed there for about 2.5 days, you know, to process out.
To process out?
Yeah. And then, you know.
Where'd you come?
Then I came back home, you know.
Home being Hamilton?
Hamilton, yeah.
Flew back fly into Cincinnati?
Yeah. Yes, I did, yeah.
When you got back home, after your military, what did you do? What kind of work?
Oh gosh, various jobs. I worked for Pease Company, home building company for a while. I worked for well, my first job was American Standard Plumbing, and I became I was like a salesman, you know, for them. And then I left them. Well, that company kind of folded. At least our branch folded. So I lost that job there, and then I worked for Pease Company. I worked mostly blue-collar jobs. You know, my last job prior to me going into the post office and that, I worked for Champion Paper Company and that, and
Champion Paper was in Hamilton?
In Hamilton, right, in Hamilton. Most of my jobs are either in Hamilton or Tri-County area or Oxford, you know, so basically in that area. And
when did you start at the post office?
1973.
Did you retire from there?
Yeah.
When?
Yeah. 30-some years, you know, almost 35 years with the post office. And, you know, yeah,
what'd you do for the post office?
I was what they called a mail handler in that. I unloaded mail sacks out of trucks, and I was a union steward for about 6 years, and but basically, you know, I worked at the post office.
Inside job.
Inside job, yeah. And then I never thought about being a carrier or anything like that. I came in on the fact that you know, like I said, at that time the post office was hiring a lot of Vietnam vets, and so I came in on their program there basically, and it was a great job. I mean, you know, I have no qualms, gripes about the job at all whatsoever.
So how many children do you and Joan have?
3 children. We have our oldest son, James Christopher, who now an old man, 50 years old, born in Italy, and dual citizenship. And then we have another son who's 9 years junior to him, Jason, and he's been in the Navy 21 years now. He's a career person and that stuff. 2 tours in Iraq and 2 tours in Afghanistan. And then we had our daughter, Tian and that stuff, who she did 10 years in the military, in the Air Force. And now she works for as a VSO, Veteran Service Officer, and for Butler County.
How do you spell her name?
Tian. And it's a crazy thing how I come up to now. She'll tell you, if you talk to her, she'll tell you, and it is, I've seen this, it's Chinese. But at the time that when I named her, I had an ex-girlfriend prior to my wife whose name was Tina, T-I-N-A. And all I did was, I wanted to name her Tina, and my wife said no, so I just took, I took the last 2 letters and reversed them and made it Tian out of it.
And that satisfied your wife.
Yeah, that satisfied her and that stuff, yeah.
What's Chris do?
He works for a manufacturing company down here in Fairfield, and that. He did work for, well, for the longest time he was a body man. He worked at various body shops, and prior to that he had worked in the building industry. He had actually worked with my wife for Norco. Was a company in that, and then he got into automotive body work and that, and he did that for a while. Now he works, and then he worked for a company down here in Fairfield called Moss Vale. They built aircraft tubing, you know, for various aircrafts and helicopters and that, which then they, in turn, he sold, the gentleman that owned the company sold the business, and now he works for Byron out of Fairfield in manufacturing. Yeah, they're a tubing plus a I don't know their other thing, but they kind of, what they did is they bought my son's prior company out. They bought them out, and then of course, then like I said, my son's still in the Navy, 20-some years, and then my daughter's a VSO.
The VSO, yeah.
Yep.
And well, I think we pretty well, as far as I'm concerned, the questions I have for you, I think how about any awards, certificates, medals, anything like that?
I just basically, I've got, just the average, stuff that we got from Vietnam, so far as Vietnam Service Medal, National Defense Ribbon, another Vietnam Service Medal. I did receive a Good Conduct Medal, but so far as no Purple Hearts, no Bronze Stars, no
injuries.
The time that RPG blast went off and that stuff, I did get, it wasn't metal shrapnel, but we had timbers in the bunker, and when the RPG grenade rocket hit and that stuff, it sent splinters into my arm and my shoulder and that. But it wasn't, it wasn't serious. I took them out myself. I didn't ask, the medic come over, checked me out, said, hey, you were actually wounded, you could be put in for a PH. And I said, which PH is Purple Heart. And I said, no, I said, I don't need anything like that. To me, I felt that somebody more deserving, loss of a limb, or physically, being, shot or something like that, those were the guys that deserved, something like that. Me personally, no.
Well, take your hat off and show it to Brian so he can just get a little picture of what you're at. Why do you have Da Nang on there?
Because that's basically where I spent most of my time at. Is that good?
Then the ribbon bars there designate what?
That designates the National Defense Ribbon, and both ribbons that we were, or both medals that we were given through for service in Vietnam. Yeah.
Okay. All right. You got it?
But and like I said, Da Nang was. I have various caps and that, but this one here was just a. It's kind of a.
Kind of your home base.
Yeah, it's my home base was in Da Nang and that stuff. So I spent most of my time up there in the I Corps area, Da Nang area. So, but I have, like I said, I have other ball caps that designate Vietnam vet, and the years that I was there.
But you talked about I Corps earlier. What's that shortening stand for?
Okay, South Vietnam was basically broke down into 4 corps. I Corps, which was up to the north, 2nd Corps, which was below, 3rd Corps, and 4th Corps. 4th Corps was down in the Delta, where where a lot of the brown water Navy guys were and stuff like that. But basically, it was broke up into 4 different corps.
And your time was spent in I Corps?
My time was up north, yeah, which was primarily, I Corps area was primarily ran by a Marine 2-star general. He actually was in charge of I Corps area, even though there was Army personnel up there and that. But there was also Army, I think it was a 1-star general up there too. It was in coordination to him. But the Marines were basically, most Marine units were in the I Corps area. So,
well, I've chatted with you for a good while. Let's let Brian ask you some questions. I've been real gabby.
Just a couple of questions.
Sure.
I was just curious, when you found out you were going to go into the military, when how did you break it to your girlfriend?
No.
There wasn't any breaking.
There wasn't really any breaking to it and that stuff. She.
It's guess
How did
what?
she find
It's
out?
guess what?
Yeah. Guess what? Well, the thing about it was that we were in school together. Okay, and that day that I was basically, taken out of school, I'm sure word got through to her that hey, Jim was been arrested, by the police and that stuff, but like I said, it just, there was no, how can I say this, Brian? There was no alternative for me. I mean, I could have fought it. I think maybe, I probably would have won it and that, but prior to me going in, there was a good friend of mine that I went to high school with, and that Sam Huffman was his name, and unfortunately he had died over in Vietnam, and he was over there, in '65, early part of '66, and I felt patriotic, there was, so far as me, I wasn't a college guy. There was just no, I mean, I had aspirations to maybe be in, matter of fact, and one thing I kind of left out and didn't even think about until it popped up now, I did take some college courses, through the University of Maryland when I was in the military and that. I had aspired at one time to be an architectural engineer. I really, thought about that, really seriously and that, but due to certain circumstances, it just never panned out. So.
Yeah, but I think the question Brian wants is, how did she find out?
Oh, how did she find out?
Yeah.
I'm assuming, I don't know. You'd have to ask her how she found out.
Well, we'll talk to her in a minute.
Oh, okay.
We'll talk to her in a minute.
Okay.
We're talking to you right
okay.
now.
I be honest with you, I don't know. I can't, because at that time, when that incident happened, I can't say that I was on the best graces with her parent. Well, not so much her dad, but her mom. We were kind of so-so and that. So, and it kind of got progressively worse after I went into the military.
Right.
You know, because I'm gonna tell you a little thing and that stuff. When being a communicator, being in communications, and being in a code person and that stuff, actually for me to have to communicate with her, I would have to send letters through a friend of ours that were in code, and she had the code. She knew how to read the code. So actually to keep her mom from not having a hissy fit and that stuff. So when I first got into communications, we learned certain different codes and that, and I in turn sent this friend of mine that she went to school with the code, and he in turn gave her the code. And so when I transferred letters, and that stuff, they were all coded. So nobody else knew what was going on.
She had the keys.
Yeah, she had the keys to the code. Yeah. So.
How did you? I guess you took tests and they placed you based on tests.
Yeah.
To go into communication.
Right. When after my GED, after I'd taken my GED down at Villa Madonna or Thomas More, however you want to call it now, they did a synopsis on my aptitude and that, and of course they'll tell you in the beginning and that no matter what you are, number one, you're a grunt. Number one, you're a basic infantryman. I don't care what your MOS is and that. If once you go through basic training, once you fire a weapon, you're a basic infantryman. You can be anything you want to be, so far as I guess it was one of my drill sergeants when I was down in basic training and that stuff. I guess I was probably, I want to say 2 to 3 weeks in, and that the recruiter prior to that had mentioned information to me and that stuff, so far as communicate. You be good in communications. You be good in this. You be good in that. And I think communications kind of stuck, with me. So that's what I push for.
And I know you mentioned it, but where did you train for that again?
Fort Gordon, Georgia. And that
you were there for how long?
Approximately about 7 weeks, and they basically they taught you. When I found out I was going to get into crypto and that, the first 3 to 4 weeks is just basic communication center and that stuff. Learning how to operate teletypes, type, a lot of typing and stuff like that. And then when they found out that my aptitude for crypto and that actually and I was shocked to hear this and that, because they have to run a background check on you. And so I kept thinking, I'll never get this, because even though the court said they were going to expunge, even though I wasn't prosecuted or anything like that, still I had a court appearance in that, and I felt that this they told me this is expunged, you won't be on your record. I still had that feeling it was going to be there. But apparently they ran a background check and that on me, and everything come back fine. So that's how I ended up with the TS clearance and that. So
you mentioned you trained on an M14?
M14.
That was before the M16.
That's before the M16.
I've heard there were complaints about the M14. What was your experience?
No, I never had a complaint. That was one of the best rifles ever made, as far as I'm concerned. In that, we actually.
I'm sorry, you're right.
M16.
You complained with the M16.
M16, yeah.
Did you ever do anything with the M16?
When they first issued them, or we first got them into our company, and that, I went down to the armory and I looked at these things and I said, "You got to be kidding me!" I mean, lightweight. I'll give it credit. I mean, it was lightweight, but it looked like something like a Mattel toy company, something that Mattel would make and that. And I actually, like I said, I trained, now this, I'm going back a little bit. Basic training, when I got down there was a shortage of M14s at the time, in our armory down there. So basically, for us to have something to drill with and that, they brought out M1 Grands and that. So I turned around, I learned how to break down, which is very similar. An M1 Grand is very similar to an M14, except for, a Grand has a self-made magazine in it, that you put 8 rounds in, whereas, an M14 has a 20-round, mag that you slap up into it. So they're very similar in weight, they're very similar in caliber, and so we trained with M1s. We learned how to break those down, and that. It wasn't until we got for our qualifying tests with 14s, 2 days prior to before we qualified, and that then I learned how to break down an M14 and learned how to basically assemble it and put it back together and become familiar with it. And but to me it was heavier, but you shot a 7.62 round to an M16, which fires a 5.56, which is a much smaller round. And if you fire 7.62, you fire an M14, if I shoot you, I know you're going down because that round is that much powerful. Whereas a 5.6 is, not that it won't take you down, but you could hit a certain area of a person and that stuff, and it wouldn't do near the damage that that a 7.62 would. And so I was, when they tried to issue me one, I said no, I don't want it. I said, am I forced? Do I have to take it? And they said no, you don't have to take it, but we're issuing M16s out. And I said, I don't want it. Now some guys did. It was, oh gosh, probably 4 pounds, 4.5 pounds lighter than than an M14. And
I heard they had jamming issues.
They did. When they first came out, the biggest problem they had with them in that was that they did not offer a cleaning kit with these weapons. And inside the receiver in that, there were certain parts that were made out of aluminum, and you had to keep this, this weapon clean. If you did not clean, if it got any type of dirt, sand, grit, whatever, this thing would jam up, and it would jam up, horrendously in that. And the worst feeling that you can have is being out somewhere and somebody firing at you, and you're trying to fire back, and your weapon jams. And that's one of the scariest feelings that you could ever come under and that stuff. And like I said, they were horrendous in that, and a lot of guys that took them and then, like I said, had problems with them. I can't swear to it, but I say that there was a lot of injuries that guys suffered because of those M16s, because they jammed. Now later on, after they discovered what the problem was, as far as them not issuing a cleaning kit with them, then it became a perfectly decent weapon. And I never cared for them myself. I'm just old school. I like something that's got enough power that if I shoot you, you're going down. No ifs, ands, or buts about it.
A lot of guys that we've talked to who were in Vietnam talk about, their exposure to Agent Orange. Do you feel like, were you exposed to it?
Oh yeah. I've got all. I'm 100% disabled in that. I've had triple bypass surgery. I've got type 2 diabetes. I've got neuropathy in both my hands and my feet. I've got skin cancer now, and it is the gift that keeps on giving. There, no matter what you do. I mean, I don't. How can I say it? I'm not mad. I'm not. You know, it happened. I volunteered. I kind of think that I was deceived because you know what they told us. You know, and especially once I got up to Da Nang, they took us in a a warehouse up there, and they told us about Operation Ranch Hand, you know, the spraying of defoliant. And the thing about it was that I can remember this major talking about this, and he even told us, he says, if you feel threatened, you know, about the spraying on this, pull out your poncho liner and cover yourself up. Well, Brian, first time that you come into an area where this defoliant has been sprayed and there's nothing. I mean, there's not a bug, there's not a leaf, there's not a blade of grass, there is nothing. I mean, it is total devastation. And, you know, plant life is life. No matter, I might not have been the smartest 19-year-old in the world, but I remember enough from biology that, hey, plant life is life. And when I come into an area and there's nothing there, I mean, it's totally gone, you know, that, hey, something's got to tell me something's wrong here and that, you know. But, you know, you had no recourse. There was a lot of times that you didn't get resupplied with water, so you had no choice. Maybe it'd be a mud hole, maybe it'd be a rice paddy, maybe it'd be a stream and that. And once this, you know, material, you know, once this stuff went into the ground, you know, it just totally, you know, totally killed everything and that stuff. So, you know, you had no choice, but, you know, you're drinking it, you're, you know, I can't say breathing it, but I mean, I you know, I absorbed it, you know, through the, I'm assuming through water and everything else and that, the contamination. So, yeah, I mean, it's a horrible disease. I have friends of mine that are Vietnam vets that do not have problems from Agent Orange. And they'll look at me and they'll say, I don't feel right. And I say, I'm happy. I'm happy you do not have it. You know, I am thoroughly glad that you do not have it, because I wouldn't want to experience this on anybody. And I would not want anybody, you know, to have the problems that I have, you know, with the Agent Orange and that. And, you know, like I said, I think first case scenario, I can't swear to it, I can't prove it and that stuff, but scoliosis was my firstborn son and that stuff. There was nothing on my side or my wife's side of the family and that stuff that, you know, would cause something, you know, like this. And I think it's a form of Agent Orange. I really believe it. And that, you know, I've got our son that's been in the Navy now, 21 years. He's had 4 deployments, two to Afghanistan, 2 to Iraq, and that. He has problems now, you know, from, you know, I don't know what kind of exposure over there, you know, but even when I was in the post office and that, during the first desert storm, we had guys that were in reserve units that got activated and went and spent time over in Iraq. And, you know, after their time over there, they come back, and within X amount of time, they started having problems, you know. So, you know, due to, you know, the oil fields being set on fire, that could be part of it. I don't know, you know, I have no idea, but it's, like I said, I would not wish this on anybody. You know, it's something that, you know, I got it. I respect what I have in that. It is what it is. I volunteered. Ask me if I'd go back over there and do it again. Hell yeah, I would. I'm a patriot. You know, so.
You say you're 100% disabled. So how difficult was for you to get that status? How you must-
9 years I fought the VA. 9 years. I just, for word, you know, for a better word, working for the government, seeing how the government works through the post office and everything else, I said, I'll fight you to my dying day in that. You know, I don't care. You know, I know the red tape. I have the utmost respect for somebody that works for the VA, because I can understand what they have to put up with the red tape and all the garbage that they have to put up with and that. So anytime that I go to the VA, or anytime I call for an appointment or whatever the case may be, or I get there and you know, I don't get seen right on time or whatever, I don't say anything and that, because, and I, you know, I tell them and that I appreciate what you do for me. I really do, and that, and I understand how, you know, the limitations and what, you know, the problems that you have, you know, working, you know, for the government and that. So, so I'm not, you know, I'm not a bad vet and that stuff. I sympathize with them. I really do. You know, I really do. Like I said, when I first started with the Agent Orange Net, you know, I just retired from the post office. I put on a ton of weight. You look at me now, I weigh 162 pounds. At one time, Brian, I weighed 250 and at 250 pounds and that. And I mean, it just, you know, like I said, all of a sudden, you know, the first factor was type 2 diabetes. And actually, the first factor was the triple bypass, but that was 4 years prior to me even, you know, even getting into the Agent Orange thing and that stuff. So, but like I said, it is what it is. You know, I don't regret it. If I had, you know, do it all over again, I'd do it. I'm sorry for some things that happened. You know, there's some things deep inside of me. There's 4 guys on the wall. I'll never forget them. And they made the ultimate sacrifice. To me, they're the heroes, you know, not me.
Well, there's a lot of them on the wall.
Yep.
Yep.
Yes, there is.
Yep.
Yes, there is. And that.
In my opinion, unnecessary, but that's my opinion. Can I have more questions?
Yep.
Just a couple more questions.
Sure.
Oh my God, I gotta.
She told you from the beginning I was a blabbermouth.
I was just curious, when you were over there, did you ever any chance to see any USO shows that have any entertainment thing? Did you ever get to see anything over there?
I missed out. I missed out on the one and only show that they had it at Da Nang, and the day prior to the show, you know, coming up and that with Bob Hope and that, and they had at that time Ann Margaret was supposed to be there, and I was chomping at the bit. I really wanted to see that show, and they turned around. Communications broke down with a Marine unit up in Dong Ha, and I had to fly messages up. So I left the day prior, and then turned around and the helicopter, the flight that I was supposed to catch back, they were having problems with the chopper, so I got stuck up there an extra day, and that's when, you know, when they had the program. So I didn't get back until the day after the program, and I come back and the guys, oh man, you really missed it. You know, I was like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. You know, I was pissed. Yeah, you know, I never got an opportunity, and that we had one show that came in there, and came into the main base camp in Da Nang, and they were a bunch of Australian dancers and some singers and that, and they weren't bad, You know, they were bad. But I think every guy's dream was Bob Hope. You know, everybody wanted to see Bob Hope. You know,
Or Ann Margaret.
Or Ann Margaret, or Joey Heatherton, or you know, because he brought some, you know, some classy ladies with him and stuff like that. But so I never got to see the big one, but I did get to see a small one.
So did you get any time away from Vietnam?
R&R.
Yeah.
R&R. Yeah, I went to. I was originally supposed to go to Australia, which is what I wanted. And at that time, something had happened, and I ended up going to Bangkok, Thailand. So I was in Bangkok, and it was pleasurable. You know, a little hard to accept because I was still around Asian people and that. But at that time, and that's primarily the reason why I wanted to go to Australia, is because I wanted to be, excuse the expression, around round eyes, you know. And I wanted that more. I think at that time the only other two options I had besides Bangkok was Singapore or Tokyo, Japan. And so I said, you know, and most of the married guys were the ones that went to Hawaii or something like that. So I wasn't really thrilled by Hawaii. Even though I was only there for a short period of time. But yeah, so I got 7 day, and I did, excuse me, I got a 3-day in-country R&R. They had a place south called Vung Tau, and Vung Tau was, it was a nice area, really crystal clear blue water, nice beaches, and it wasn't an area. There wasn't a lot of NVA or VC activity. They didn't give out too many 3-day passes for that. It wasn't really called an R&R. It was called a pass. So, but I did get one of those down there, and that was pretty nice. It was kind of a 72-hour let down, you know, get drunk, you know, whatever, you know, period. So.
Just one last question. Did you keep in touch with anybody you served with?
Unfortunately, no. Some of the guys over the years, I did keep in touch with one guy for a while, back in the early 70s and that, and he suffered from PTSD really bad. When he come back to the States, he just could not adjust, you know, whatsoever. He had problems with authority, he had problems with his jobs and everything else. Finally, he lived in Oregon, and finally, my last communications with him has been back in the mid-70s. The last time I got any type of message from him, and that he told me that he was done with society. He was going to become a hermit. He was going to go out. He was going to live in the woods, live off the land, you know, do whatever and that. And after that, well, he only had one parent alive. His mother was alive. His father had passed away earlier, and then his mom had passed. So the last communication I had with her and that stuff, she said she hadn't seen him for almost a year, but he packed all of his stuff up and he just, went out into the woods. And I mean, he could have lived out there. He could still be around. I don't know. I mean, he was 2 years younger than me. I'm 71, so he was 60. He would be 69 now. So I mean, there's a possibility that he could still be around, man. You could be a mountain man out there somewhere, for all I know. But no, unfortunately, I didn't really get a lot of addresses from guys from Nam. Now, we did keep in contact with some people that when I was in Italy, and we kept in contact with them for a while, and then that's kind of faded over the years. And that my best choice of people now is the Veteran Social Command, the group that I've been, those are my brothers. I have conversations with them all the time, and I feel comfortable, with them. That was probably the biggest plus. Brian was joining this group, And when I initially went with them, there was about 15 of us, and now there's 490 some members now, and you know, so it's yeah.
And you're based out of Hamilton? Or?
No, we're based out of Middletown, and yeah. I real briefly, I don't want, you know, because we've been here forever. But anyway, I didn't care for the Cincinnati VA or the Hamilton Clinic or anything like that. I'm not going to go into a big rumor about it or anything like that. But so I transferred everything over to Middletown. I had the biggest thing that set me off was back in when I started seeking help back in the 80s. They didn't care about Vietnam vets. You know, there's nothing wrong with you. Here, take a couple ibuprofen. You know, you'll be okay. So I just, you know, kind of, you know, got ticked off, and I said, that's it. And matter of fact, I almost give up on the VA altogether. And I ran into a friend of mine and that stuff that was connected with Middletown and Dayton, and he told me, he says, it's a whole different world, you know. And he said, trust me. And at first I didn't believe him, and I thought, yeah, no, but I did. It was like sunshine up there, where I was getting storm clouds down here. You know, now I can't. This is me. You know, I can't say that everybody's had bad treatments down here. You know, it is what it is. But for me, it just didn't work. So once I transferred to Middletown, and that's how I met, you know, a lot of these guys that belonged to Veteran Social Command, and then everything started clicking there. So, but yeah, you know, I was happy. You know, these guys here are my brothers. I consider them blood brothers as far as I'm concerned. You know, because I didn't have any, you know, any other siblings in that. I was an only child, but.
Well, I don't want to cut you short.
No, hey, we've been here.
Brian's got to get back to work.
Hey, he's got to get back to work. I got to shut up.
I want to thank you for giving us this interview, and thank you for your service.
I appreciate it.
Good luck with your 100% disability.
Hey, I appreciate it. Brian, and I appreciate you, too. Thank you.